I was on a road trip with my mom and dad, and my mom got a free book on her Kindle, and it was all about human trafficking globally overseas. And I had no idea that we still had slavery in our world today. I didn't know that people were in situations where they didn't have human dignity and they weren't treated with as human beings. And so, because I have a unique way of learning about trafficking and my perspective is different, I thought, how can I help people like me who didn't know about it and kind of were blindsided by this horrible issue? How can I help them engage in a way that feels tangible? So often, especially when you first hear about human trafficking, you're very overwhelmed. It's this horrible issue and you just don't know what to do about it. And so we thought, well, if we can create business, so create products. We have run a food truck. We're hoping to break ground in a cafe. If we can engage people in the things they already do every day and say, hey, if you take this first step, if you buy this product, if you eat at this place, if you buy this coffee, you're taking a first step to become more aware and to fight against, changing a culture that exploits people, to fight against modern day slavery. And so it's kind of meeting people where they're at. That's how we marry business together. So
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at MsUSATexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Pyx Global at www.hopyxglobal.org.
All right, welcome back. So, Steph, tell us a little bit, how did you get involved with this?
Back in 2012, I was on a road trip with my mom and dad, and my mom got a free book on her Kindle, and it was all about human trafficking globally overseas. And I had no idea that we still had slavery in our world today. I didn't know that people were in situations where they didn't have human dignity and they weren't treated with as human beings. And so really just from reading a book and then starting to do research, I started to Google human trafficking in Minnesota, where I'm from and where I live. And once I started to learn about human trafficking and exploitation, my whole world changed. Everything changed.
Wow. Well, I hear people from all walks of their lives and come to fight this, and your story is one of the many, but your story is unique. A lot of them, they might have been, a survivor and they had the passion wanting to help. But for someone like yourself, just read from the book and, read just the very unfortunate stories about people who are still going through what we call modern day slavery nowadays and step out, actually take actions. This takes a huge leap of faith. This is amazing. That you talked about how you try to raise awareness through business. How do you do that? Can you explain to us?
Yeah, so I think because I have a unique way of learning about trafficking and my perspective is different, I thought, how can I help people like me who didn't know about it and kind of were blindsided by this horrible issue? How can I help them engage in a way that feels tangible? so often, especially when you first hear about human trafficking, you're very overwhelmed. It's this horrible issue and you just don't know what to do about it. And so we thought, well, if we can create business, so create products. We have run a food truck. We're hoping to break ground in a cafe. If we can engage people in the things they already do every day and say, hey, if you take this first step, if you buy this product, if you eat at this place, if you buy this coffee, you're taking a first step to become more aware and to fight against, changing a culture that exploits people, to fight against modern day slavery. And so it's kind of meeting people where they're at. That's how we marry business together. So our businesses that we run, they raise funds, they raise awareness to support the work, to support awareness, to support survivors. And it's really trying to make doing something about human trafficking in our culture more accessible to the average person.
That makes total sense because, like you said, before you read the book, before many people and a lot of people, including myself, before I got into this, I thought it was people like myself who look like myself in a container ship, being shipped from overseas, and usually they're foreigners. And sometimes you see on social media those meat packages and have human being in there, but that's really like the wrong concept because this is happening in our communities here in the US and in your communities around the world wherever you're listening. So we really need to pay attention, and it's really very scary about who the traffickers are. And so if I were someone who doesn't know anything about trafficking, what would you tell them? Like, what do they need to watch out? What are the signs and things like that?
Yeah, we say to see the people around you. And I think in America, especially where this individualized culture, it's not negative. It just is where there's more community driven cultures. And in America, we're more of an individualized culture, which means we really don't see people outside of our immediate community as people we need to see or care for. And I think we need to challenge that because what's happening is that there are people who their specific job is to see the people around them and see their vulnerabilities. And then they step in and they meet those needs with the purpose of exploitation. So if you and I, who are in our communities, if we would first just see the people around us and then notice their vulnerabilities, notice if they're hurting, notice if they need help, notice, if they're maybe in an unhealthy relationship, ask questions. I always say we have our first ring of people, like I would say my kids, my husband, my family, my best friend's kids. But just if you could see outside of that first ring of people, see the lady you see at Starbucks every day, or ask more questions of the person that you sit next to at work, or the students or your neighbors, and really are more intentional with that second and third ring of people that you see all the time, but you maybe don't know a lot about their life. If you could know about their life, know about their vulnerabilities, you're going to see if they're being isolated. You're going to see if maybe they're in an abusive situation, which those are the signs. You're going to see if maybe they have an immediate change in behavior. Like if you have a youth who was really outgoing and then they become in a relationship with someone and they become really introverted, or if you have a youth that was very introverted and they're in a relationship with someone, all of a sudden they become like over the top outgoing. Any of those drastic changes, you want to know the people around you, so you notice if those things are happening. And then, at least in Minnesota, this is hard. We don't like to engage in people. We think it's none of our business. But if you see those things happening with the people around you, engage. Just not in a way that's abrasive or aggressive, but just in a way that says, hey, I care about you and I wonder if you're okay, or ask questions, like, well, what is that relationship like, or what is happening, in your life, or, do you need some help? Like, how are you doing financially, or do you have a safe place to go? Things like that. And I think we would be surprised at how many people that we encounter every day are struggling. I think we all put on a face, especially in our social media driven world, but the people around us are often struggling, and they're struggling emotionally, they're struggling relationally, they're struggling financially. And how can those of us who know what it is to have healthy systems around us, how can we come in and be a healthy system for others? Yeah.
That's quite amazing. So pretty much like, if you're around people, just pay attention and engage and offer help. And, this is Steph, this is my impression about you. You just, you're a loving and caring person, and you're just so care about, like what I hear, like your story matters, and that really what really strikes me about you and the Stories Foundation. This is amazing what you all are doing. And I think for all of you who are listening, please pay attention to the people around you. Like Steph said, it's very unfortunate with social media now. People have to put on a mask and a lot of pressure. Say, people, and a lot of people love the holiday season, whether you celebrate Christmas or not. And some are struggling, believe it or not. So these are the things that just offer the help and show the care. And that's all that matters.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned about Minnesota. I'm here in Texas, the big Texas country. And but I have been to Minnesota, and that's how we met. And tell us a little bit more. You've mentioned about the mindset of people over there.
Yeah.
You've mentioned, the situation in Minnesota. Can you dive in a little bit more about the human trafficking situation over there in terms of, what are the crimes, maybe the laws, and just touch upon locally what's going on over there?
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, what's positive about Minnesota in terms of human trafficking is the safe harbor laws that a lot of other states have adopted originated here. So, when I learned about human trafficking in 2012, I honestly thought I was behind the times. Like I thought, oh, there must be a lot of people doing something about this, and I just didn't know about it. And the reality is it was just kind of becoming a topic of conversation back then. And the laws were just changing so that, people who were victims of prostitution under the age of 18 and then under the age of 24, it was just changing that they were treated as victims instead of criminals. And all of that was shifting in 2012, 2013 here in Minnesota. And so really we've led the way in that. I think the flip side of that now today is that we've put a lot of focus and a lot of money on that safe harbor, those laws and that model and that under 24. And we kind of stopped, I think, there. And then COVID happened and, things went backwards in a lot of ways. And especially in issues of injustice, I think, we were in a pandemic, it's hard. It's not that anyone did anything wrong, but things have kind of, I think, stalled here. And we really have a huge need for services for survivors of trafficking, exploitation, and abuse, for housing, for next steps. And I think here in Minnesota, we like to think that crime only happens in the places where we think crime happens, which would be in the city, but really, when we look at trafficking, the crime of exploitation and trafficking happens anywhere that there's the internet, anywhere that there's a strip club, anywhere that there's a farming community. I mean, any community, every county in Minnesota has had reports of trafficking. Any community is vulnerable for people to be trafficked and exploited. And in our culture here, I think we're very Norwegian. We're very that Swedish Norwegian kind of stoic, kind of frugal, kind of we don't talk about hard things often. We like to just keep it nice. And people say Minnesota nice, and I say there's Minnesota ice because we're fluffy on top. So it's kind of like, oh, everyone's nice. And then if you try to go deep, sometimes it's really hard to talk about hard things. And so I think those are some of the challenges we have here, is that trafficking is happening all around us, but it's really hard to talk about, and people don't know how to hold it, and they definitely don't know what to do with it. And also, I think when you start talking about something so horrible that's been an issue for so long, there has to be a sense of, I don't know, like, why didn't I know about this? And why haven't, we haven't been doing a lot about it because we didn't know. And I think there has to be a burden that comes with that. Once you learn about something so hard, you start to see the world differently. And then you start to think, oh my goodness, like this has been happening everywhere. Even for me, a long time ago, I lived in Ukraine, and I had no idea about trafficking and exploitation back then. And I see my whole life now through a different lens with what I know now. And so it's, how do we communicate in a way that people don't feel shame? but that we can admit, now that we know differently, we can do differently. And so what does that look like? And so I think those are some of the positive things and also the challenging things here.
Well, I think you explained it really well, in both the positive and the challenging ways. We have to acknowledge that a lot of work has been done, especially Minnesota being the leader in the safe harbor law, and a lot of work has been done. Unfortunately, this war doesn't just end because, people age, whether it's 18 or below or 24 below. So there's a lot of gaps that we need to fill, and the challenges of the services and housing needed, and how people can sort of, do the awareness work on their own. So what are your tips that you would say? Like if, we talked about if a person who doesn't know what it is and what are the signs to watch out for. But if someone has already known a little bit and they really have the heart like yourself, but they're just new and they don't know where to get started, how can they help?
Yeah. So we always say awareness is action. So you always take that first step of understanding the issue and really understanding what it looks like. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions about human trafficking, I think. And I always say every myth or misconception has like a little grain of truth in it. So it's not like that's not true at all, but you really have to educate yourself to truly understand the issue, especially here locally. And everything that happens internationally happens locally. It just looks different how it plays out. And so understanding that neither, international trafficking is horrible and local trafficking is horrible, and child trafficking is horrible, and it's horrible if you're over 18 and you're trafficked. It's all bad. And so just understanding the nuances of that. And so we have education materials on our website. We have partners that have education materials. There's so many good resources out there. There's really no excuse in 2023 to not educate yourself about human trafficking. There's so many resources out there. And here locally, or we've done Zoom things too, someone like me or you can come in and do an awareness presentation. There's online like curriculums you can take, there's books you can read, and that's really the first step. And then from there, it's how do we change our culture by changing our conversations? How do we equip teenagers and youth by having conversations about safe and healthy relationships? How do we really highlight manipulation and exploitation and how that goes undetected in our culture? And how do we shine a light on that? And how do we begin to change these norms? I believe human trafficking is allowed to happen because we have these cultural norms that we've allowed to go unchecked. And really, if you look at our culture, manipulation is kind of an acceptable way often to do relationships and to do business. And if you have manipulation on one hand, you have trafficking on the other. And so we have to really see where we have contributed to the reality that we have in our culture today. And then we need to start changing the way that we engage with people, the way we talk. So those are first steps about how you use your influence by becoming aware, taking responsibility, and then you start to share with your community. And that's how we really change culture. And that's how we'll see trafficking decrease.
That's very well said. Become aware and then taking the responsibilities through, educating yourself and having a healthy conversation with the youth and try to change the culture and change the norm. And I understand there's a lot of work on your shoulder, that's for sure, because, it is a lot of population that still needs educated. It's interesting you mentioned about the manipulation, and obviously because of the nature of the foundation and how it raise the awareness through business, like you talked about business manipulation and personal manipulation and the similarities. And, in some ways like grooming and power and control, these are all related. And in fact, I found out that the power and control is actually also initiated in Minneapolis. So there's so much that I have learned while I was there. And I think this is really, amazing. Can you explain a little bit more about the manipulation in terms of human trafficking?
Yeah, so when you look at someone who's been trafficked and or exploited, you're looking at somebody who it's a relationship driven crime, right? So I think oftentimes we think it's a white van that goes and kidnaps you, and that happens, but that's not most of the time that's not trafficking. Trafficking is a relationship is built. Somebody sees, the trafficker will see a need that a person has, whether it's an emotional need, a physical need, or all of the above, and need to be seen, valued, loved, to belong. I mean, these are all basic human needs that we all have. There's no shame in those needs. There's no shame in needing shelter, food, you know, but there are people out there who are trained to see these needs and then come in and meet those needs with the purpose of later exploiting them. So they build trust and they give something of value, knowing that they're doing that only to take everything from this person, you know, down the road. So if you take that and you take it to, you know, 10-year-olds or 13-year-olds or 15-year-olds in relationship with each other, if I'm just being your friend so that you can, you know, make me feel good about myself, or so that you can give me something, that's not a healthy relationship. You know, to be kind to someone only so that you can get something from them, that's right. That's not healthy. And yet, how often is that how we operate in our world? It's like, I have a need. I think you could meet my need. So I'm going to treat you in a certain way so that you will fulfill me. And that's not a healthy way of being in relationship. Healthy relationship would be, you have value as a human being, and I'm going to treat you with kindness and respect and honor. And then hopefully you see the same in me and you reciprocate. And obviously we're all at different places in our mental and emotional health, but how do we create education around that becoming the norm, that it's okay that you have needs. You can be honest about your needs with me, and I'm here to help you, but don't manipulate me. Don't treat me in a certain way so that back, you know, through the back door, you feel better about yourself. Right. Like,
Yes.
So I think we don't realize how deep seated manipulation is in our culture, and it really sets people up to be exploited. Because if you have a 15-16-year-old and like their community, their whole life has used manipulation as a relationship norm, well, they're not going to see the signs of someone coming in to traffic them, because that's going to be normal for them. And then it's too late, and they're already isolated, you know, abused, and stuck in this cycle. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge like you said, the gaps in our own culture and our own unhealth, because we have to change that if we're going to help people not be trafficked and exploited.
You know, this is really sad that we talked about how in my culture that I didn't understand. So people explain to me like, Eileen, this is America, and this is what we say, that, you know, what's in it for me. And it's really sad, but it's also not, if you think about it, this manipulation is happening everywhere and around the world. And you've talked about that you lived in Ukraine, and this is some news I just found out. And as you know, that this past year we have accepted a lot of Ukrainian refugees, and we are going to accept more refugees from Afghan. And regardless that these people, they're vulnerable, and that's what the traffickers target on. But I would be interested to hear your point of view of how you think, like, you know, as far as refugees are concerned, as well as our community people, just people in general, we are all vulnerable in some ways. And how does the traffickers take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think something I've really had to learn, and something I try and really communicate to people, is that, well, there can be a lot of shame around being taken advantage of. Even if you consider yourself, if you've ever been in a relationship where you've been really manipulated, or where there's been narcissistic behavior, there can be a lot of shame that, how did I not know? How did I trust this person who is taking advantage of me? And something that we all need to understand is that it's human to trust, and there's no shame in trusting someone. And there's a really great book that I read this past summer by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking to Strangers. And he really talks about how the way our society runs, it runs because we trust each other. Like, I trust you, Eileen. Like, we have relational trust because we're human, and that is normal and healthy. What's not normal and healthy is that there are people out there that exploit that trust or betray that trust. And so when you're thinking about refugees, they have so many vulnerabilities, and everybody has vulnerabilities too. That's the other thing. I think sometimes we think vulnerabilities are something to be ashamed of. Everybody is vulnerable. Everybody wants to be loved, seen, valued, have belonging, have community, have safety, have, a home and everything they need. That's very normal. That's human. So when you look at a refugee, they've lost everything, right? They're in Ukraine, their cities have been blown up. They don't have their homes, their communities are spreading. Their security, their jobs, everything. And so when you look at that, that's an extreme example of how somebody can come in and they say, hey, I'm going to help you, which is exactly what people need. People need help. They need support. They need someone who's going to care for them and take their hand and walk alongside them in life, especially in a refugee situation. And so if I'm a refugee and someone comes along and says, I'm going to help you and your family get to safety and whatever, but then that person isn't actually there to help them, but they act like they're going to, and they build the trust, and I trust this person. And then, in a month or 2 months or 3 months, all of a sudden I'm not in a healthy situation. I'm in the most horrible situation. And this person did not help me. In fact, they are exploiting me and they're using me. And I'm maybe in the United States and I don't have status because this person lied to me. And that's what we're talking about. When we talk about trafficking that happens cross borders, we're talking about oftentimes it's a trust relationship in some way. Something was promised and then it was not delivered upon the way it was promised. And that's definitely happening. People are coming in and they're meeting needs initially. That's the other thing. These people will initially come, do what they say they're going to do and meet their needs, but then there's a point where they stop. And it's the turn, and then the abuse starts, and the needs are no longer met, and that's where trafficking and exploitation happen.
That's really a shame. Like you said, the Ukrainian government has kept their male in prime age just for the war. Therefore, the majority of their refugees are women and children. And these people, they left their home with nothing, absolutely nothing, and to be taken advantage of. If I could imagine myself, if someone come tell me, say, I'm going to offer you a green card. I'm going to offer you just, really, I'm not talking about even luxury, just room and board. I think I would take it. That's to offer you the hope, offer you life to start over and everything, but to take advantage of these people. It's just really sad. Are there refugees in Minnesota that, what can people do if they see people who are refugees, and what would you suggest them to help? How did you suggest them to help?
Yeah, there are refugees here. And I think in most states right now, we have a lot of refugees coming from a lot of places. And I would say get involved in the organizations that are bringing refugees over. How can you help these people who are coming have belonging and community, safe, healthy community? And it is about physical needs, but it's just as more about emotional needs of inviting them in and becoming their friends and helping their kids get into school, and how can they learn English or whatever those needs are. Because the more that those of us who are healthy and know what healthy community is come alongside those who have vulnerabilities, the less vulnerable they are to somebody who would come in who's unhealthy, who would have the purpose of exploiting them. And so it really matters what those of us who come from healthy communities and have those resources, and it's not always financial resources. If you know what it's like to be in a healthy relationship, my mom taught me about what healthy relationships were. So I see it. I see when someone is being manipulated, not all the time, but mostly. And so that's a resource that I have that I can offer to other people. It's like, hey, that person's not treating you with kindness and respect. Maybe they don't know that. Maybe they never knew any different. How can we use what we've been given, create healthy spaces of community for those who are vulnerable, refugees being a prime example right now, so that they're less likely to be exploited. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who, have negative intents, and they want to exploit people and use them for their own gain. So how can we step in and change that story for people?
You open a whole dynamic of topic about the cultures, right? Just like you said, I think I totally agree with you. Like some people, they just don't even know that they are being manipulated because it's like so deep in their culture, and it happens like not just like overseas, not just to foreigners, but even like in the local culture, because that's the way they were brought up. Let's say, men can be victims as well. But let's say if you grow up and your dad beat up your mom, so you think that's all right. And how do you, show that this is not all right? And you're just gonna, if you are a boy and then you grow up, be a man and marry someone, and one day something happens, that's your reaction because you think that's the way it will happen or it should happen. And so that is the culture. And that is like what you said about changing the culture and how much that needs to be done and what the society needs to do. And there's just like so much to do. I think, this is something that we definitely need to pay attention to as well. And I also wanted to sort of ask you a question about the victims of sex trafficking locally or sex trafficking victims wherever they're from, but in the United States. I know that in Texas, we're one of the states that has some records expunged that unless you're kind of like, doing a background check through like the Department of Justice or the law enforcement, pretty much like if you get hired and everything, you don't really have the records shown in the general public's eyes. What is the situation in Minnesota, and what is your opinion about this?
Yeah, I think in theory that is what's supposed to happen. I'm not an expert about the legal side of things. What I do know and what I can speak to is that it is a journey. So let's say that someone comes out of trafficking and it takes 5 to 6 touch points with someone to even feel safe enough to change their lives and to come out. Then they get assigned an advocate or a mentor to work with them through those things, because let's say they can't get a car because their credit is horrible because their trafficker took out a car in their name and then didn't make the payments, right? So there's this journey of working through and going to court hearings and getting to a place where you can even live your life at a place where we all would consider that normal, right? It's normal that I don't have a record and that my credit is good, relatively, because I've just done the things you do, right? No one exploited me. No one used my name. No one left me in a drug house and then the cops came or whatever, who knows? And so I think what the general public doesn't understand is that it takes a lot of steps to get someone to a place where we already are, where they don't have those barriers to living their life. So I think, yes, in theory, the records are supposed to be expunged, and it's a process to get there.
That the reason why I asked is it's because I feel like I really like your business concept about having the business to provide
yes,
not only the awareness to the general public, but also an opportunity, because so many of them being wrongfully prosecuted, and they are the victims. They're not the criminals, but now they have the records. But you provide this opportunity for them to create jobs, create the income for them, so that they don't have the vulnerability to be re-trafficked. So now tell us more about your business and the Stories Foundation, what you all are doing and how people can help.
Yeah, so we purchased land here in Minnesota last year, at the end of last year, a year ago, to build a give back cafe. So we want to have cafes like this all over the place, both here in the Midwest and everywhere. And the purpose of the cafe is to be a place in the community where people can come and they can have conversations like we're having right now, where they can learn about manipulation, exploitation, and human trafficking in our culture, and they can begin to see differently, and they can begin to speak differently, and they can engage people and cover vulnerabilities and all of those things. And then they also spend their money there. They buy good food, and it will have a boutique part, so support local businesses, business items made by survivors and things like that. And then that money goes to support the awareness work, but it also goes to support jobs for survivors and those vulnerable. And it goes to support housing for survivors and those vulnerable. And I think what you said is exactly right, Eileen, that, you know, when someone comes out of an exploitive situation, what does their resume look like? You know, what is their experience? How do you communicate? Maybe they don't even know what they want to be. I always think, like, when I was 18, I had a very limited worldview. Like, I couldn't have imagined I'd be sitting here talking to you. And I think we only know what we know. And maybe these people haven't even been given a chance to dream about their own lives and they don't have experience. So how do we create a platform for them to come in, to heal, to rest, but then to have new opportunities and new dreams? And something else that you said was so good, because you mentioned hope earlier. And I think really hope is what traffickers exploit, right? Like, if I'm in a relationship, I have hope that I'm going to be loved. If I come to the United States because you told me that you're going to have a job for me and I'm going to have a green card or a worker's permit or whatever, I have hope for a better life. And then when that hope is turned into abuse, it's the most heartbreaking thing. And I think, how can we give people back hope again? And you have it on your, unity and hope. And I think it's so powerful. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the hope and the love. I feel like, hope and love and unity, it is contagious. It just, like I met you and I feel the positive energy, the love from you. And then I'm going to go meet another person and pass that on. So I feel like, if we can all just change the culture overall, whether, whatever your heart cares about, whether it's your love for animals, whether it's your love, care for veterans, homeless people, it all matters. And how are you going to love and show the love and share the hope with the community through unity and love? So this is just like so amazing that I've learned so much from you about the work. And I really, hope that all of you who are listening will be, able to help in some ways if you're local in particular, because I really am looking forward to the Give Back Cafe. And I hope that one day you'll open one in Texas as well. I really believe in your dream and keep up with the great work. And I cannot say enough thank you, Steph, for what you're doing in our communities.
Oh, thank you. You encourage me so much. I'm thankful for you and your voice and your passion and your perseverance. It just encourages me to keep going. So thank you.
Thank you. I think it takes a village and takes an army, and we're just one of the little people in there, but together we can end trafficking. And I feel positive in 2023. Now, is there anything you would like the audience to know?
Well, I always say your story matters. And I think sometimes when we think about human trafficking, it's such this like I said, it's this overwhelming issue. And the reality is that if we're going to change our culture so that people aren't abused and exploited, it's going to take each and every one of us. And that doesn't mean you have to start a nonprofit or whatever. It just means that when you go out into your community and your sphere of influence, see and engage with the people around you in a meaningful way, champion healthy relationships, love people because they're human beings, not because they're going to give you something back. Support people in your communities who are doing work to cover vulnerabilities, all those things you just mentioned. There are vulnerable people in all of those spheres. Support people who are engaging with vulnerable people and covering vulnerabilities. There's so much that we can do. And really, it's just doing the things that we're already doing differently. You honestly don't even have to create like a big change in your life to fight human trafficking. You just have to do the things you do differently, with different eyes, with a different level of vulnerability. At Stories Foundation, we say your story matters. Live your story. You have so much value within yourself to give to the world. Share that with others. Be vulnerable. Share story, compassion, listen, create spaces for authenticity within your sphere of influence. And then we'll see stories change. And that's how we change culture. So don't let yourself believe the lie that only people like me and Eileen, which we're just normal people, that, that we're the only ones that can do anything. That's just not true. If you all don't do something with us, then what we do it just won't be as impactful. So that's what I want to say about Human Trafficking Awareness Month, is that every month should be Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And, you have ways that you can engage, and don't allow yourself to be so overwhelmed and think that you don't matter, because you do.
Thank you so much. It's so well said. I really can relate to about Human Trafficking Awareness Month should be every day. I always hashtag HTime 365 because I'm like, everyone is talking about human trafficking in February. Okay, let's go back to usual. Well, I tell people like, people are still suffering and work still has to be done. People like Steph and the foundation still have to be operational, and a lot of people still have to be helped, and the needs have to be met. But this is amazing what you said, how to change the culture, that just through doing things differently that you already are doing. But for those who have been through that, your story does matter, and just live with your story. And this is amazing. I am absolutely loving it. So thank you so much again for being the guest on our show, Steph. And you're watching the MsTexas show. We are the voice of hope for victims, survivors of human trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence. And thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode.